Welcome to the End of the Road podcast. Each week, we select one, from several hundred, stories about the Great Lakes region and the tip of Michigan's thumb. These are taken from thumbwind.com and presented here so that you can listen to it anytime, anywhere. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's story from the end of the road. This week's story is the history of the mysterious and remote Charity Island. There it sits, a lush tree-lined island on the horizon of Saginaw Bay. Big and Little Charity Islands are 10 miles from the western shore of Michigan's thumb. Except for the seasonal residents who live and host tours at the lighthouse keeper's house, the island is uninhabited. These islands are considered, by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, as one of the more remote and least visited islands in the Michigan Island National Wildlife Sanctuary. Visitors are few due to the boulder-filled and treacherous shallow waters that surround the island. Charity Island history is one of isolation and remoteness in a busy shipping area. The remote island dominates Saginaw Bay. Big Charity Island is one of the larger islands on the U.S. side of Lake Huron. At over 250 acres, it imposes a dominating outline at the mouth of the bay. It has an 11-acre pond that is spring-fed and surrounded by reeds. It's a favorite spot for nesting bald eagles and other birds. As a result, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has denoted both islands as off-limits to camping and hunting due to its role in the region as a rookery. The Native American history of the island chain. Local lore tells that the island has been used for thousands of years. It was a stopping point for those traversing Saginaw Bay and as a source for the stone called chert, which is used for making stone tools. The first notation of the island in maps were from the late 1600s by the French, denoted the Big Charity Island with the name of Shawangunk. Shawangunk has been translated to mean, in the smoky air in the eastern U.S. tribe in the Lenape language. The French named the small island to the south as Ile de Traverse, or Traverse Island. The voyages of La Salle. The island was supposedly visited by the French explorer de La Salle in August of 1679. He was on his way to Mackinac on the ship Griffin. However, some historians dispute this claim, as it was noted that the Griffin crossed the 30 miles of Saginaw Bay at night. The exploration of Lewis Cass and Henry Schoolcraft. In 1820, United States Secretary of War, John Calhoun authorized Michigan Territorial Governor Lewis Cass to lead an expedition of scientists, Canadian voyageurs, and Native Americans into the wilderness of the Upper Great Lakes to survey the territory and look for the source of the Mississippi River. Cass included Henry Schoolcraft in his group of 40 explorers. Schoolcraft was a noted mineralogist and geologist and was key to the expedition's mission. The route that they took to cross Saginaw Bay mirrors a popular theory that the route of Oak Point to Charity, then on to Osable, was part of well-known Indian transit route. It included a stop at the island as a safety precaution from the fast-moving storms that are well known in the bay. Schoolcraft noted in his journal the following entry. In crossing the bay, we landed a few moments upon Shawangunk Island, which is found to be based upon compact limestone, and contains embedded masses of chalcedony and calcareous spar. I also picked up, during the short period we remained, a lump of the argillaceous oxide of iron, and some detached fragments of a coarse striped jasper. These discoveries created a strong desire to make a geological survey of the island, but we were prevented from attempting it by the necessity of expeditious progress across the bay while the weather favored. The expedition continues to the mouth of the Osable River, then to Michilimackinac, and presses on to Sault Ste. Marie, and finally Fond du Lac and into Wisconsin. The role of Charity Island and Michigan's lumbering era. The timber along the Saginaw Bay region was exploited early in Michigan's lumbering era. This was from 1830 through 1910. Lumber mills were built on just about every river outlet that led to Lake Huron, or Saginaw Bay. Mills were built in Bay City, Saginaw, Seaboing, Caseville, Port Crescent, New River, and Port Hope. The rivers provided convenient transportation for logs to the sawmills, which were located near the lake shore ports. Ships entering into the shallow bay had to contend with the limestone reefs and shoals at the tip of the thumb and around Charity Island. Navigation issues were evident throughout the Great Lakes. In 1838, Lieutenant James Homans was tasked with assessing the waters west of Detroit as part of a new regional lighthouse district. Homans was tasked to make reports regarding the condition of each, and make recommendations for any future lighthouses. One of his recommendations was to place a lighthouse at the mouth of Saginaw Bay. Development of the Charity Island Lighthouse. Congress appropriated funds for the construction of a lighthouse on Traverse, or Charity Island, in Saginaw Bay for $5,000, and also for Port Austin Lighthouse for the same amount. Construction on the island began in 1856, and continued into the following year. A 39-foot brick tower was constructed from brick brought in from Milwaukee on the steamer Search. As the tower was being built, the editor of the Bay City Express traveled by the island on the ship. In an article by the newspaper on June 6, he chided the government on such a needless expenditure since the island itself was known as a source of good building stone. At the same time, the lighthouse was being built. A young captain named George Meade was ordered to begin surveying the upper Great Lakes, including Saginaw Bay. The bay was critical to the young state's lumbering industry, and no accurate maps existed that showed exact distances and depths of the area. Thus ship grounding and wrecks were all too common. Meade set the baseline of his Lake Huron surveying starting from the long peninsula of Sand Point. From here, he set up triangulation towers at key points along the north and south shore, including a newly constructed lighthouse on Charity Island in the middle of the bay. Colin Graham took command of the light as its first keeper in May, and began regular operations soon after the tower and light were completed. The light provided a 13 nautical mile range of visibility. This range was planned, as the government was in the process of constructing a set of lights up and down the coast, and 13 nautical miles was considered adequate, both to keep boats off the island and to navigate from one light to the next. The story of the wreck of the Oconto in 1885. On the afternoon of December 4, 1885, the passenger ship Oconto was making its last trip for the season out of Oscoda toward Alpena. However, the ship was greeted in the bay by a blinding snow squall and gale-force winds. Captain McGregor decided to turn back and take shelter in nearby Tawas Bay. In the gale, the ship's course was too far east. As it was passing Charity Island, it grounded in the shallows that guard the island. The captain and crew saw the lighthouse and thought they were near Tawas. They freed the ship, and upon coming around they hit aground again and came to a dead stop. The Oconto was stuck, but not taking on water, so the passengers and crew remained on board and weathered the gale until the next day. The cold night was brutal. They were carrying livestock which broke free and wandered the ship. In the morning light, they could see that the ship was about a mile away from Charity. The captain signaled with a whistle and soon, the lighthouse keeper MacDonald and assistant William Pierce could be seen on shore. They launched a lifeboat and began rescue operations. The 23 passengers and several of the crew were taken by rowboat to shore. 2 women and a child went to the lighthouse, and the men took shelter in fishing huts on the island. The 47 wreck survivors and crew disbanded and made their way back to the mainland over the next week. While all of the passengers survived the ordeal, one crew member, the ship's cook, Charles Brown, died of fright and was reportedly buried on Charity Island. The Oconto was salvaged in the spring, and resumed service only to sink later near the St. Lawrence River at Fisher's Landing. Charity Island's role in the fishing industry. With the lighthouse fully automated, the government sold Charity Island to the Gillingham Fish Company in 1926, retaining just the lighthouse reservation. Gillingham Fish Company was established in 1886, and was at their peak of fish production in the 1920s and 1930s when they purchased the island. They shipped tons of perch, walleye, herring, whitefish, and carp to New York and Chicago in refrigerated railroad cars from Bayport. In November 1915, Bayport Fish Company sold $30,000 in stock to purchase Little Charity Island from the indebted Butyl Fisheries Company. The automation of the Charity Island Lighthouse. In 1916, the Charity Island Lighthouse became the first Great Lakes lighthouse to be fully automated. A newer light, located closer to the shipping channels at Gravelly Shoals, became operational between 1939 and 1942. The Charity Island lighthouse was discontinued. The tower and the keeper's house were left to the elements. Another element of Charity Island history is the number of times it was bought and sold. In 1963, Gillingham Fish Company sold the Big Charity Island to Saginaw businessmen for development as an island resort. Elaborate plans called for a landing strip, bridle paths, and biking trails. The General Services Administration received a top bid of $15,500 for the lighthouse reservation on the northeast tip of the island. The 1990s Charity Island development. Standish real estate broker Robert Wiltz and investors bought Charity Island in 1993 for development. They envisioned 24 exclusive homes across the island. The first phase of the project was to take 60,000 pounds of dynamite to blast out a small harbour. It took 16 weeks to carve out the marina and connect it to the lake by a channel. In 1997, plans for development were deferred, and Wiltz sold most of the island to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a new acquisition for the Michigan Islands National Wildlife Service. The non-profit, the Nature Conservancy, bought a few more acres from Wiltz and bought the lighthouse from the government. Robert kept 5 acres around the keeper's house, which architects said was unsalvageable and had collapsed. Robert and Karen Wiltz rebuilt an updated lightkeeper's home on the same foundation. They kept much of the sight lines and details of the original house. However, it has been updated to be self-sufficient, with wind and solar power generation, and its own water purification system. Today's sightseeing cruises and island lodging. Wiltz built a new house in the site in 2003. This hosts weekend visitors for lighthouse sightseeing and dinner cruises. Guests can embark on the island from Caseville with Explorer charter cruises or from O'Grey with Charity Island Transport. The tour includes a review of Charity Island history. There is also a new lodge that was built for those who want to stay on the island. It sleeps 4, and there is a 3-night minimum stay. Transportation from the mainland is included. This concludes this week's story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Thumbwind's End of the Road podcast. If you like this kind of story, you are invited to join our 15,000 other monthly visitors on our website at thumbwind.com. Please watch for and download next week's story and take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and give us a review. Have a great day.